2008 hits, and then what happens in the practice?
So in 2008, we had really shifted away from dinner seminars at that time and focused almost predominantly on premium finance, which required the credit market to be healthy in order to utilize it. And so when 2008 hit, instantly overnight, all credit that we could utilize to fund these premium finance for these high net worth clients, ultra high net worth clients, dried up. And so we scrambled, had to go back to dinner seminars, which hadn't been working awesome. That's part of the reason why we had gotten away from it and really started focusing very, very, very much on this niche of premium finance. And so we went back to dinner seminars, scrambled as quickly as we could. But just like so many people were dealing with, 2008 was just a ricochet through everybody's lives. Our clients that would normally just take any recommendation were in this analysis paralysis. And so 2009, our revenue dropped 33%. 2010, it dropped another 33%. And so by that point, we were just drowning. I mean, major debt, nearly $1 million in debt, because we retained the business, we retained our employees. And so what we found was the dinner seminars, as much as we were getting back to the bread and butter, still were not performing. So here we were massively in debt, doing what we were told to do, which was just keep mailing more, just keep trying to fill rooms, make more expensive dinners. And so at that point, we were spending upwards of $14,000 to try and fill 2 nights of seminars with 30 people. And that's 30 people, like bodies, not households. Okay. There's a difference.
Right.
And so the lack of leads, and certainly therefore commissions, were declining, and so was the ROI, and we just couldn't keep shoveling money at the problem. So that led me to the point in 2016 where I was in the ER, and I thought I was having a heart attack, and actually it was just debilitating stress. And so because of that, I finally threw my hands up and said, I'm out. I want to sell the practice. I don't want to do this anymore. This is too hard. It's not working. And that's what I did. I initiated the sale of my half of our 17-year practice.
So 2008, the market falls apart. The premium finance focus all of a sudden is kind of pulled out from under you. You go back to trying to make the dinner seminars work. And then it sounds like there was an 8-year period from that point to 2016 when you decided you wanted to just sell and be done and actually leave the business. So how long, what for 8 years is a long time. Was it still just trying to do the traditional dinner seminars for 8 years at that point?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly
just
what it
making
was.
sure I understood you right. So 8 years of really trying to make that work. That's not a short amount of time to sell out to trying to make that work. And I know you had told me in the past that you guys were seeing, probably from what the mail houses told you, some of the worst response rates in the country. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing is we did start focusing a little bit on a tax practice. We did what so many advisors do. We just were chasing the shiny object. We were, we changed FMOs twice during that time period in hopes that we could get other components to add to our practice to help it be more sustainable and not have such severe highs and lows. Because you put $14,000 into 2 nights of events, and if you have to cancel one because it's such poor attendance, and then the next one barely hits the food minimum, and then maybe they're just not the right people in the room, and you have a 40% closing ratio, having 6 people to sit with, and then only 75% of them actually show, it's devastating. It's devastating, and it's not a surprise why 88% of advisors who get in this business quit in the first 3 years. Number one reason, lack of leads. They just can't handle that part of it. And so we were doing what everybody else was, trying to find, what was going to work for us. We were in a very highly competitive area, Seattle area, which still very much is, and trying to find something to differentiate ourselves. That's why we brought on the tax practice. We thought that that was going to be a little bit different, and it worked for a time, but it became too much of a drain on our staff, and just created some other issues. We still did retain it for almost 7 years until we handed it off to a CPA. But so it was during that, really 2010, 2011 was the low financial point for us. That's to the point where we ended up losing our house and still deciding to retain our business, but something had to go, and that ended up being our family home. Randy saw that much more as a financial play that was just the right thing to do. For me, it was just devastating, because I just thought I was a huge, massive failure, not only as an individual, but as a mom for my kids, and also as a financial advisor who now had their house foreclosed on. So we spent really the next number of years rebuilding and digging out of that debt. And even though things were sufficient for what I would consider a practice that's not heavily leveraged, it's not digging out of a hole, we needed more octane. We needed to produce greater results with what we were doing, and push that ball as hard and as fast as we could. And 2016, when I finally came out of the ER and just, said I was done, I really felt that just selling it was going to be the right thing to do. Finally, just go, I can't do it. I mean, Randy still believed, he still had his focus set on this was going to work. We just needed to push a little longer and a little bit harder. It finally was my undoing. And so I went to sell it, and laid off employees, had the email set to go to the 600 clients, and told our kids the night before final signatures. And they were devastated, couldn't believe that mom and dad weren't going to work together anymore. So the next morning I woke up and went for a run right before I went to sign the final paperwork. And I just really felt like I was being told very clearly, deep in my spirit, Arwen, you go forward with the sale of the practice, it will end your marriage. And so met with the buyer that morning and called the whole thing off. I really did feel that it was the wrong thing to do, but it was that moment. And I think often we're all faced with moments like that, where we choose to not go what might be the easy route when things are really, really tough. That finally it was like the weight of the pain and the possibility became more, the possibility of what could happen became bigger. And I just said, Randy, I don't know what it is, but I want to take over all of the seminars. I want to start doing them. I want to do it my way. I just feel like there's something that I can do differently. I don't know what that is, but I just feel like that is the trajectory we're supposed to go. And he had done it for 17 years. So he agreed. I mean, he was like, I don't want, if you can figure out a way to do it, go ahead, I'll support you. But then also, he just, he believed in me and he loved me. And so he let me do it. And it was that moment where almost 17 years into the life of our practice, Randy stopped doing seminars and I stepped into that role and began doing it differently than what we had seen.
Now when you, I know, ultimately found yourself in the women's market, maybe if you could share just a little bit of why the women's market? I mean, why focus on that? Because, I know you now and I know your story and I know, about, your business and what you've experienced and the growth that's come from that. But it's interesting because I think what I've learned from you is the women's market is really one of the largest and yet completely overlooked markets.
Mm-hmm.
I would almost say it will be the market, a few years from now.
Right.
So how did you find yourself there?
Yeah. So when I took over the seminars, I did what I had seen everybody else doing. I just started doing traditional seminars open to everybody. And I did them a little bit differently. I didn't have a PowerPoint. It was whiteboard, tried to, create something that looked a little bit different, but it still was very much the same people who are getting mailed to over and over and over and over again. And so after about 5 months, I was introduced to a women's event. So I met a female advisor who had a women's platform, and a little bit of training to go along with it. And so I thought, well, this could be an interesting addition to what we were already doing, and maybe a little something different, because I looked at it just like every other advisor for the most part does. I saw it as, I'm going to serve this little niche, like this little women's niche. I'll do this other stuff over here, the traditional seminars that everybody can come to, and then I'll do these little niche women's events. So that's kind of how I saw it. When I did my first women's event, so it was about 6 months after I took over seminars, so middle of 2017, I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw groups of women, many women in attendance, who were coming up to me and telling me, Arwen, I could eat on financial advisors in this town 2-3 nights a week, but your invitation to this women's event is the first one I have ever received. And I was thinking, that's weird. How could that be? I mean, they're all getting mailed to by all these other advisors. Why? That's interesting. It's the first women's event that invitation they've ever received. And the important part was they were in my room. They were in my room hungry for the message, not just another free dinner, to just see if I had something new to teach them. And so we started to just see this just very simple women's invitation that was inviting women to come to an event that was women only. And we were filling rooms, which is something that we hadn't seen since a little bit after the Great Recession. We just were struggling to fill rooms, and yet we were doing it consistently over and over and over again. And I was getting this constant feedback from the women in attendance, whether they were single or married. Most of them, the majority, are single, divorced, widowed, never married. But they were just telling me, this is the first one I've ever received. This is the first one I've ever received. And I was thinking, gosh, that's so interesting. So as we continue to do, events, traditional events, women's events, and we were constantly and consistently filling our women's events, we started to do more women's events and less of the other, and more women's events and less of the other, until little over 2 years, about 2.5 years into doing women's events, it went from 0% of our marketing to 80% of our marketing. And we have mostly most of the advisors in our company are men. Half of our team are male. It's not a women-only company. We don't just serve women, but we saw that was the area of focus that we were getting the biggest bang for our buck. I mean, it really is the truth.
It's really a new blue ocean. It's really kind of what you discovered.
Yeah. And I just figured it was going to, after a couple of months or maybe a year, it would start to subside and I would start to see, less results. And it just kept building and building. And I found that out because women refer 3 times more than men do. So I had women referring other women to my events too. So they were helping to fill my events, not only just referring in my office. But so it became 80% of our marketing within 2.5 years. It took our company, our 17-year company, and it doubled its revenue in that period of time. And the profitability, because we were still spending the same marketing dollars, yet we were doubling the number of attendees in the room. The profitability went from 29% our first year when we started it to 39% to 45%. And then, of course, the most miraculous and amazing part of all of this is in June of 2020, when we sold our practice, our profitability was at 52%. And we sold our practice for 20 times what I was going to sell it for in 2016. Talk about not quitting when you want to quit. It's okay to want to quit, just don't when things get hard. But be willing to really, truly look at doing something different, truly different, and getting good at it. That's the thing. I made that my thing. I didn't continue to just make sure that I was dabbling in a lot of things and continuing to chase the shiny object. And, oh, there's this great new Social Security thing coming out and this new tax planning thing. And, oh, let's talk about inflation now. No, I recognized this was where I could really make a tremendous impact. And I just got really focused and intentional on understanding why it worked, starting to track the data, and ultimately leading me to where I am today, being able to train advisors on how to learn from so many of the mistakes that I learned, but also be able to have this just additive to their practice. It's just remarkable.
Well, I think what's really remarkable about that story is that you were in a area of the country where you were seeing historically, I mean, some of the absolute worst response rates to your traditional mailers, to the tune of, like, I think you had told me 0.2% response rates. And now you're mailing to women for women's events, and you're seeing, I mean, tell me a little bit about just kind of like the before and after, like, or the comparing the traditional seminars from just like a pure numbers perspective. Like, what were you seeing? Like, how much were you spending? How many mailers were you sending? How many buying units were registering? And then when you shifted to women's events, how did those numbers change?
Well, when I started doing women's events, I wanted to figure out why. I mean, why could I mail to the same zip codes and with my traditional events not even hit my food minimum? I couldn't even fill the room even with clients attending. And then yet a couple of weeks later, I could mail to the exact same zip codes and I would have a waiting list for my women's event. And this was happening consistently. So, here's an example. So 1 October, I was doing 2 sets of events, traditional events. And then 2 weeks later, I was doing women's events. And what made this so stark in contrast is I literally did the exact same event. I mean, it was the same venue. It was the same start time, same days, Tuesday, Thursdays. We did a 7,500 piece mailer to the exact same zip codes. We did a Facebook add-on campaign. There were no holidays to affect our results, and there was no strange weather. Okay. Everything about these events was identical, except for one set of events was open to everyone. And the 2 weeks later, it was limited to women's only. That was the difference. Okay. So my traditional event, I had 33 people attend between the 2 nights. That was not awesome. Okay, because 33 people was actually only 19 households, since a lot of them were couples. Okay, so I didn't even hit my food minimum one night, barely hit it the second night, but I did land 13 first appointments. So 19 households turned into 13 first appointments, which eventually turned into 2 new clients and 850,000 of new assets. Okay. Now, a stark contrast 2 weeks later, which again, in my women's event, if over marketing and saturation was going to be an issue, that would affect the women's event because it was 2 weeks later. But I'm still mailing to the exact same zip code. So my women's event 2 weeks later, I had 84 women attend. The only difference is all 84 of those represent a household. Okay. So of those 84, 48 scheduled a first appointment. And then of those 48, 7 became a new client. So of those 7, and yes, I have to point out 2 things. One, a lot of the women in the room are married. So that is something to expect. Typically that might be, it could be upwards of maybe even up to 50% of a room, but usually it's more like 30% of a room or maybe even less. But it does require a little bit of finesse to get those women in for an appointment since their spouse or partner weren't there. And then women on average, divorced, widowed, single, have less money. And where we live in the Seattle area, that was typically about 90,000 less than the couples that we sat down with. That's what we were typically seeing. So of those 84, 48 scheduled a first appointment, 7 became a new client, and that generated 2.3 million of new assets. Everything was the same, with exception I had to buy more dinners because I had more women who actually attended. right? But the ROI on my traditional event was 3.8, which a lot of people will run their practice off that. That didn't work for us anymore because we were still digging out of that hole. And so the women's event generated an ROI of 8.5. That's more than
That's massive.
double.
Yeah, that's huge. Huge.
It was awesome.
So let's talk a little bit about the women's market specifically, because, you know, a lot of advisors, you know, on the line listening, they're probably not familiar with the stats and the actual reality of the shift that's taking place and where women find themselves and are going to soon find themselves. So maybe just educate us a little bit on some of what you've shared with me about the women's market.
Yeah. So I often hear, oh, that's a great little niche that you serve. And it always makes me chuckle because once you find out the details about it, there's no way it can be looked at as a niche. So women make up now the largest segment of the US population, and they hold the greatest amount of personal wealth in our country now. It's about 51%. And the incredible part is in the next 20 years, women are expected to inherit 2/3 of the $30 trillion being transferred via inheritance from baby boomers. I mean, honestly, think if you're in a career of financial planning for the next 20 years, think about that. That means in the next 20 years, women are going to hold north of 60% of US wealth. That is remarkable. Remarkable. That is one of the biggest reasons why advisors should make it a point to at least have part of their focus on women. I'm not saying like 80% like we did, but at least make it a pillar part of their marketing, right? Because that is one of the biggest opportunities that we are facing. And the thing is, I'm not alone in that. You could easily pull up the internet. You could look at Forbes, Pershing, Lord Abbott, Investment News. They've all written white papers in the last number of years with this title or something very close to it. Women are not a niche market. And it can't be. They're the largest segment of the US population and the greatest holders of wealth. So when you start to embrace that and understand that there is a lot of money there, but the important component is many of those women are not attending a traditional event because fear of sitting at the table with men, and they feel like they're kind of fearful of what they think they should know and they're embarrassed by it. So a lot of them just don't go, you know, or they're looking for something that's less data heavy and a little bit softer on the delivery because they haven't received a lot of financial education. BlackRock did a study in 2020, 55% of women in the study said investing isn't for people like me. Okay, if that's the case, more than half of women don't think investing is for them. That means they do not have financial education. So we have to keep things simplified. We can't be too data heavy. This is why understanding one of the, you know, really big component differences from a lot of women, not all women, but a lot of women are not looking for something data heavy, and it's falling short or it's falling on deaf ears when they do receive it and they don't take action and go in and get help.
Well, I think one of the things that makes that so exciting, and you can talk about this in more detail, but you talk about $30 trillion and 2/3, what is that? $20 trillion is going to shift and be solely in the control of women. And that in of itself is massive. But here's what really makes this, in my mind, something that advisors can't ignore. I think the stat that you shared with me was that when a woman loses her husband, within 12 months, she's going to switch advisors. So you're talking about a $20 trillion tidal wave, and factually, we know they're going to switch within 12 months. To me, that is got to be one of the largest opportunities that I can think of in the entire industry.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah, the two biggest facts that most advisors are completely unaware of, you hit one of them. So 73% of widowed women leave their financial advisor within 12 months of the passing of their spouse. So that means 3 out of 4 women their spouse dies, and within 1 year, they are now looking for somebody who actually will communicate with them in a manner which is best for them. Because that's the reason they leave. The number one reason they leave is lack of communication. So that means that she's now in full control of the assets of the household, and she's looking, right, for somebody who's going to serve her with intention. But then the other one that is just, and I mentioned it earlier, but the other one that's just an absolute game changer is the fact that women refer 3 times more than men do. And this is such a tremendous benefit towards a practice, because not only does it help to fill your events, because women are, they're communal beings. They like to go to an event with a girlfriend. So they're not often going to come solo. So a woman is going to bring her friend. So she's referring somebody to your event just to go there because they want to do it together. She's going to refer women directly into a practice where they know women are a priority in that practice. But then also just understanding that that is what helps to increase your profitability. Because if men are less likely to refer, doesn't mean that you can give the best service in the world, but women like to talk. They like to share things that they're happy about. And so if you're doing good work by her, she's going to be out there willing to talk about you and how great her advisor is, and in meeting her needs and communicating with her. And maybe they send me these little gifts, or, whatever the things are that make your practice unique in the way in which you serve women intentionally. And it just flows through, and that's what helps to increase the profitability and really stretch the marketing dollars.
Excellent. I think that's perfect. I think we're good. I think we hit on everything.
Just like that.
Just like that. I think there's so many clips in there. Nailed
Rockin'.
it, as I knew you would, and you look great doing it, even though we're not live
thanks.
and we won't use the camera. It's just you and me. But sometimes when you dress a certain way, you get right. Like, it helps you get in the headspace to nail
true.
it.
That is true. There's nothing. I totally agree with that. It's the